And by the way, at the very beginning of the article, he describes this symposium, like they go to this medical conference, and it's not really a medical conference, it's a killing conference, and it's like 300 people at it, and they're all there, you have a drink with me later on, and it's a big networking thing going on, and they're all hanging out with each other, It's a huge business.
It's a massive business.
There was one line, this particular line I liked in The Atlantic. This is the story of an ideology in motion. Hello, my name is Anne McElhinney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Yes, we're still in era, still in Ireland.
We've had lots of visitors, haven't we, Phelim?
We've had a lot of visitors.
Including visitors from over in America. In America. We had Lisa and Alan Robertson, who's so great. They came.
Yes, Lisa and Alan from
Duck Dynasty.
From Duck Dynasty.
Alan, you remember, is the beardless one.
It's the beardless one. Alan's a pastor. And Lisa, his wife, we met them on... Well, we're on MRC cruise, Media Research Centre cruise, become great friends. And as you may know, Alan's father died, Phil Robertson, the patriarch of the Duck Dynasty family, or as you guys say, dynasty, died. And I think we just phoned him up and he says, we were always inviting him over to Ireland, And
this time they're like, we'd really like to come to Ireland.
Yes.
We're like, do it.
Yeah. So they came to stay. They had, actually, I have to say, they had an amazing immersion into Irish culture.
Yes.
In fact, I would almost say you should have made it more touristy.
Yes. You're right. Yeah, they were in a lot of people's homes.
Yes,
and
right.
They did a lot of just down and ordinary Irish stuff.
Yes, and they went to local plays. They didn't go to the Abbey in Dublin. They went to local. Mind you, the standard of plays and acting in Irish communities here is truly amazing.
Yeah.
So they went to a performance of The Field, J.B. Keane's The Field in Ballahadreen, County Roscommon, which I think gives them a really interesting insight into the culture of Irish land, Irish violence, Irish religion, sometimes the thinness of Catholicism, Irish suspicion of outsiders, Irish
obsession with owning land, I think, and all of that.
Yes.
But they also we brought them to Irish pubs, so they tried the Irish Guinness and all of that.
Yes.
But they also got to go.
Well, I took them to an IRA pub as well, which I think is a fair enough description of it. There's a photograph of Alan and Lisa in said pub, and let's say an IRA supporting pub. They were supposed to go up north and meet some people from they've met some people from the Unionist community, and they were going to give them a guided tour of certain Unionist landmarks or meet people up there, but unfortunately ill health just didn't work out. They weren't able to go that day, so they got a bit of a one-sided view of.
But they got to go to a castle.
Yes.
So we brought them to a castle, and they couldn't get over it, and they really enjoyed it. And actually were served Irish coffee, which I think they'd never had before, and I think it was their favourite drink of the whole time, their favourite tipple. Don't forget, by the way, I did the Irish coffee recipe on the podcast in the past. Irish coffees are very, very nice.
Those two things. I don't want to go into too many details, but the person serving the coffee, who made the coffee, was, let's just say, is a former butler to some very, very high level figures. So for them to be making the Irish coffee was amazing. The glasses they were served in had measures
to make it much easier for the person who was making the Irish coffee to do it correctly. I think we should just play, actually, by the way, I really think we should play my recipe for the Irish coffee.
Okay.
Actually, you know what, we'll do that at the end. Do that at the end, so if you want to watch that, we'll have that recipe at the very end.
But I think they really enjoyed themselves.
I think they did.
It was amazing to have them. And
now we were delighted to have them.
Yes.
And in other news, I've just spent last weekend, the last couple of days I've been in London. I went celebrating a friend's big roundy birthday, let's put it that way. I went to a thing called now I can't remember. ABBA Voyage, I think it's called, or
ABBA Experience.
Or ABBA Experience, something like that, to celebrate a friend's big roundy birthday. And I would say, to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, I would say that the ABBA Voyage is worth seeing, not worth going to see.
Oh, what do you mean? So you mean if you're in London?
If you're in London for a month or 6 months and had a problem trying to fill all your days, I think you could go to the ABBA Experience. But I don't think if I was going to London for a week that I would take a whole section of 3 hours out or 4 hours out to go and see the London, the ABBA Voyage.
So it's ABBA in 3D or ABBA in...
So it's like an AI thing. It's kind of like an AI kind of multimedia thing, but there's a live band and it's kind of confusing exactly what's real and what's not real. A number of things stood out to me. One was they had at least 2 songs that I and everyone I spoke to had never heard of. It's kind of weird when you think of the catalogue that ABBA have, because they've a ton of songs that everybody knows. And I think what then struck me later, because the thing ended and I realised, oh, they never played Mamma Mia, and I'm thinking, that's really odd, because obviously everyone knows that song. And obviously there was all kinds of copyright issues going on. So within that, I think it limited the number of songs that they could have. And so that, I think, was a failing in the experience. But what was really funny and worth kind of mentioning is that before we went, I met an English woman who, you know, I casually mentioned to her, I met her in a coffee shop, and basically she said, oh my God, you're going to London, you're going to go to South London, you're going to go to this place called Stratford, which is not as in Stratford upon Avon, this is Stratford, London, which is in South London. And she said, oh, you're going to get mugged and be very careful with your phone. And I have to say, I kind of a little bit in my head was going, well, thank you for that. You know, I was being very polite to her, but I was thinking, you know, she's really, you know, she's really a bit paranoid or whatever. We got out of the ABBA experience or the ABBA voyage thing in London, and I would say conservatively, there were 300 boys, young boys on bicycles, push bicycles, wearing masks, about 300. I didn't film it because I suddenly remembered this English woman who said, whatever you do not take your phone out, because how these guys operate is you take your phone out, then your phone is active. They then swoop in, get the phone is open. So then they have access to everything, and they can do things like they can write an email to your bank and, you know, get your bank to change the password. They can do all kinds of stuff like that.
Can I just say also, the last time I was in London on my own, well, I think it was the Trans on Trial play.
Yeah. You witnessed this.
I witnessed 200 guys on bikes, young men on bikes, and a tourist was filming them, and somebody went along and grabbed the phone out of his hand and made off on a bike. And
I can tell you, it was truly terrifying.
And what about the police?
And so, well, you know, I didn't see any police around. And actually, it was interesting what afterwards, and because this woman actually, because the group that went, or my little group that went, had heard this woman and kind of, you know, and took her to heart, actually. We had this idea that, you know what, we're not going to walk back to our hotel. We'd always planned to take a taxi, so I had ordered an Uber to come and get us. And, you know, Abdullah arrived, and actually it was very funny. You know, we get in, and I said to him, what the hell, you know, what's going on here? What do you think of this? He'd never seen the like. He said he had never seen it quite as bad. Mm-hmm. He acknowledged that these biker gangs are all over the place, but he had never seen it quite as bad. But then he went on to say, you know, and he had he was a very, very, very strong accent. He was from Algeria. That's right. He was from Algeria, but he had a very, very strong accent, so I found it hard to understand him. But basically, he started talking about how awful London was and how terrible London is now, and went on to tell us that his daughter was going on a school trip and came home and planning to go on this school trip.
The daughter?
And the daughter, I'm getting to the good bit here. His 10-year-old daughter, going on the school trip, came home with a condom. Actually, sorry, multiple condoms, because just in case.
The school
for the school trip. And so she'd been given these condoms by the school. Now, this guy, I think, was very definitely Muslim and was very unhappy about the whole situation. And I said, I hope you complain to the school. And he said, there's no point. There's absolutely no point in doing that. It will make no difference. Equally, I said, what about these kids? And he said, there's no point in the police coming. They will not be arrested. They're juveniles, etc. And my other takeout from the trip, which was, you know, and it's funny because it kind of ties into all of this, is I think there's been a reverse colonialism has happened. It's kind of incredible to watch it. And I've no other commentators have mentioned this before. But London is very, very, very Muslim now, to an extent that's uncomfortable. And particularly seeing women wearing those letterbox outfits where they only have their eyes visible. And anyone who thinks that that's okay or something that's cool and diverse, you know, as they say in the trendy social media things, you can unfollow me now, you know. I mean, like, seriously, the idea that any progressives would be on the side of that. And the men, of course, who are with these women wearing that complete cover, they're wearing shorts.
They're wearing Man City jerseys.
They're wearing Man City jersey. They're wearing bling. You know, they got the shorts on.
But they're wearing modern
clothing.
So
they have their slave woman who has no identity of any kind. So I was definitely taken by that. Everywhere I went, it felt like a majority of Muslims in every situation. And I thought it was pretty extraordinary because England is not a traditionally Muslim country. And it's funny that Muslims, I just think it's a funny detail, you know, why Muslims escape certain Muslim countries and don't go to another Muslim country. Because loads of Muslim countries, by the way, and why would you not escape the Muslim country you don't like, maybe, and go to another Muslim country? But no, they come to countries that aren't Muslim at all, and I think there's possibly,
yeah,
a reason for
it's
that.
funny you should talk about that. You talked about colonialism there, and I think that's a very accurate description of it. But then that just reminded me, and just before we came on air, I said, let's talk about this, because I was reading this article in the Irish Times, which I haven't really talked to you about, and this is all
He's doing one of these surprise things on me now.
Yes, so they do a thing, returned immigrants.
Oh yes, I've seen it.
So a bit like us, actually, someday maybe, we'll return to Ireland and we'll be returned immigrants, and we'll be working out how to drive on the right side of the road and how to get Irish driver's license.
And we'll be really obnoxious, and we'll constantly say things like, when I was in California.
Yeah, things like that. So, but there's practical things, there's emotional things, there's cultural things that are coming back. So they interviewed 4 people, and they interviewed Kate Gleason, 39, from Waterford. Very nice part of the world.
Lovely Waterford.
Sunny southeast, is it?
I think so.
Yeah, so the weather's not bad. She returned to Ireland from London in 2024 when her father became ill. She had been in London for 9 years and also lived there for a time in the early 2000s. As a gay woman, Kate initially found it easier to live in London, quote, because it's a bigger city. In that perspective, I found it to be easier to be who I was because there was less judgment around. I felt in Waterford, everybody knew me, and I was always scared eyes would be on me and they'd be judging me. It was still very taboo here at the time, 9 years ago. Complete nonsense, by the way. But anyway, now things are different, completely different, she says, about Ireland. I probably feel safer here than I do back there in London, to be honest. I was going like, the most cosmopolitan city on the planet.
Interesting. What happened in London then?
This, she says, this is suicide. This, she says, is due to having lived in an area where she encountered people with, quote, a negative outlook on the LGBT community.
Who would they be now? Who now would have a negative
a community
who would have a negative... Okay.
No, actually, she lived in an area, right? She feels these views stem from their religious beliefs.
Are we going to name the religion now from Waterford?
Actually, that's a good question. I can't remember. Yeah, she doesn't, so far she hasn't named it. It's all very coy, isn't it? I wouldn't feel as safe walking down the high road holding my girlfriend's hand because I know I will probably get a few tuts and a few sighs over there.
In London?
I think you might get more than a few tuts and a few sighs. That's walking down the area you feel comfortable walking in. But there are lots of areas, Kate, I would venture, you do not walk down holding your girlfriend's hand because you know that it would be detrimental to your well-being. So you self-censor in some ways. Still, Kate loved the anonymity of London. She had a close group of friends there. Admits she's found it difficult adjusting to living in Ireland. When I used to walk into town 10 years ago, I knew 10 people in the space of 5 minutes. Now I don't know anyone. I wonder why that would be, Kate. But this is
You're getting to the good bit now.
Well, I think that's even part of the bit. Why don't you know anyone in your hometown? I mean, obviously people have grown up and moved on, but
No, sorry, hang on. She's talking about Waterford now.
Yes, she's talking about Waterford. She notes the increased number of non-nationals living in Waterford. Just notes it. She notes it, okay. Saying, quote, it doesn't bother me in the slightest.
Of course not. Good for you, Kate. Look at her. So progressive.
Yes. Talking about, she says, I think it's a natural progression in this world, and that's how it should be. We've been taken in all over the world. Why shouldn't we take people in? So she's leaving London, or she's happy to leave London because she and her gay girlfriend can't walk down the street because of people from a certain community with certain religious
Which
views. Which she doesn't name, but I would venture that the non-nationals that she sees in Waterford and the ones that she has no problem with are exactly the same people. However, she thinks the community spirit that we used to have is gone.
In Ireland?
In Ireland.
Okay.
Alan, you don't have people knocking on your door anymore like you used to. People have to ring you in advance and say, I might come around Tuesday next week. So the community spirit... So she's leaving London because she doesn't feel safe as a gay woman. She comes over here, and that is, let's be honest, is Islamic immigrants. She comes over here, notices lots of Islamic immigrants, and doesn't see that in...
Not making a connection there.
10 years' time, 5 years' time, we will have exactly the same scenario. She'll be getting the tuts and the size and a bit more. Mm-hmm. I mean, as we say often on this podcast, in this very town, the son of an immigrant, an Islamic immigrant, slashed the throats of
beheaded
2 gay men.
Yeah.
So that is, but Kate from Waterford has no problem. I
think Kate from Waterford is talking in the Irish Times, you see, and so she wouldn't want her neighbours to think that she would be in any way intolerant of.
Who was it? Gal Sad talked about suicidal empathy.
Suicidal empathy.
Anyway, let's talk. We got off on a tangent there. What else is on the show today? Today, we're going to show you how the nice people in society are declaring you unfit for existence in the womb and at the end of your life.
Yep.
Genetic screening of embryos goes commercial and mainstream. So does killing older people in Canada. So it can get you at the beginning or the end, really. Mm-hmm. So the people that they don't want or need anymore are disposable, very much disposable.
Yes.
Fact. And the New Yorker magazine.
Oh dear.
Storied.
Very storied.
Great writing, great writers. They actually have a racist on their staff.
Did they sack her when they discovered she was a racist, Phil?
No, because she's still working there. Because don't worry.
I think I know the kind of racism she has.
She's only an anti-white racist.
Yes.
And this is a good story. We reveal the great veteran disability scam. We reveal how you Americans, with your love affair with your military, you're allowing people to rob you blind, and we're all paying the price. So, yeah.
And then we're going to look at the comments at the end, and thank you for all the comments that were sent in, and we will address a few of them at the end of the show, and you can write a comment in, and maybe your comment will be read out in the podcast next week, when we, by the way, will be in Los Angeles again.
So, New York Times podcaster Ross Douthat.
Douthat.
Oh, Douthat.
Douthat. It's quite a name. But anyway, yes, Ross Douthat. This is fascinating. I came across this story and I just thought it was extraordinary. He interviewed this woman whose business is basically tearing apart what we would have traditionally known as the family, I suppose, really. Her name is Noor Siddiqui. Her company is called Orchid.
That's what sounds very nice, but her business is basically deciding who lives and dies
through genetic screening of embryos, and it's super creepy. But he did an interview with her in the New York Times, and they filmed it, and it became up. It's a podcast. It's available all over the place, and we kind of had a good deep dive into it because it's
well, there's a vibe of this is the train arriving at Auschwitz, and
we will choose who will live and who will die.
Yeah, the staff, and then. Actually, but I would argue only the Nazis were generally ashamed of what they did at Auschwitz.
Yes.
There are very few photographs, as we know from that play, very few photographs of Auschwitz or anything like that. But, this lady goes on a New York Times podcast to talk about you live, you die, I also want to say there's another vibe to this podcast.
Yes, which, I think you spotted this early on, and because you have a particular interest in the vibe.
Yes, it's the Elizabeth Holmes vibe. So for you, those of you living under a rock, Elizabeth Holmes, it was the former CEO of Theranos, young, charismatic.
She didn't blink, by the way. Look at the photograph of her there. Like, she has this whole thing where she never blinked, which I think is pretty creepy in itself.
I was going to say slightly strange, but actually she's a very strange female.
Yes. She wore these black polo necks. I think she was kind of getting off the Steve Jobs vibe.
Yes, and I think she was modelling herself.
So what was Theranos selling?
Well, she became the youngest self-made female billionaire in history, etc. She was interviewed by Clinton.
Everyone.
They said they would diagnose hundreds of diseases and conditions
from a single drop of blood.
Just a prick of blood rather than the whole injection.
No big drama, so that you'd go to your local CVS, you'd do this little prick of blood, and you'd get back this amazing information.
It's hard to emphasize just how much of a darling of the media she was. I mean, there wasn't a New York Times podcast at the time, but if there was...
didn't have her.
Well, no, there wasn't a New York Times podcast when she was doing anything, but if there was, she would be on it.
Yes.
She was
everywhere.
She was everywhere. A front page of Fortune magazine.
And by the way, she had all these extraordinary people on her board. Like, she had Henry Kissinger on her board, and
and interesting, nobody medical on her board.
Yeah,
Henry
very
Kissinger,
smart.
General Mathis.
Yeah,
those kind of people, Mad Dog Mathis. Who, as Trump found out, was a terrible person. But, we should have known from his activities on this board. And they defended her almost right up to the end. She's currently serving a lengthy prison sentence.
Yes.
As she was found to be fraudulently exaggerating the technology and the ability of her technology to actually diagnose anything significant from a drop of blood. And she was committing fraud.
By the way, she was committing fraud, but with disastrous consequences. And there were examples, I think, in the trial where, people had believed her and given the drop of blood, been told all's good, and
or
then
all's bad.
you know, well, actually, I think the more serious one was where people were told all is good here, and they didn't treat or go and get treated or checked out for cancers that were then left undetected. So a genuinely super bad girl, actually. But you were getting a definite
definitely
Elizabeth Holmes vibe of this woman.
Noor Siddiqui, now definite Elizabeth Holmes vibes. Holmes first came to attention from an investigative journalist, John Carreyrou, of the
Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal. When he read a profile of her in the New Yorker, actually, written by Ken Aoletta, and it was mostly positive, but I remember this phrase, Ken Aoletta described the science and her explanation of it as comically vague.
Oh, comically vague, yeah.
And that caught Carreyrou's attention. And she also could not give too many details of what the process was because much of the alleged science was proprietary. Holmes first came to attention when...
Elizabeth Holmes.
Yes. Holmes could also not give too many details of the alleged science because, as she said in the interview with Ken Aoletta in the New Yorker, it was proprietary, right? Well, have a listen now to Noor Siddiqui describe her company and the science behind it, and ask yourself, do the words breakthrough science and comically vague not spring to mind? You know, this could be Elizabeth Holmes describing her company because it's all science, but it is also comically vague. So let's take it away there, Noor Siddiqui. Noor Siddiqui.
Yeah, so what Orchid can do is it gives parents the power to protect their children before pregnancy begins. So what happens today in IVF centers is that, they're operating essentially almost blind, right? So this really, really critical decision about which embryo to transfer happens with extremely limited information. So what happens is that the embryo that looks best under the microscope kind of wins this morphology beauty contest, is often the one that's selected. Other times, there's a very limited genetic test that's offered that looks like a tiny fraction of genetic diseases that could affect a future baby. So Orchid completely changes that. We're the first company in the world that allows parents to actually sequence the entire genome of an embryo, so sequence 99% of the bases in an embryo's genome, which allows parents to detect risks for some of the most serious conditions, so heart defects, birth defects, pediatric cancers, developmental disorders, things that are massively change the trajectory of a child's life. The vast majority of these diseases don't have cures. So what's really exciting about this possibility is that now parents have this ability to protect their children from an entire category of disease that previously we had to just hope for the best and wish that our children wouldn't be affected by them.
So we should really spell out exactly what they do. So they test these embryos that
have been created through IVF.
Yes. And they take 4 little cells, and they 4 cells from an embryo, and they run hundreds of tests.
And they have a selection. I'm going to go into this at the end, by the way, but there's a whole selection of things that they're testing for.
Yes.
And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that in a minute.
Cancer,
we're going to get into that in a minute.
But based on that, and based on their science, they and of course, we don't tell you. We'll come to this. We don't tell you to dispose of the embryos, but they're basically saying dispose, dispose, dispose.
Well, by the way, then we get, to really comically vague. And you have to ask, why are we so comically vague? Like, why be so vague about numbers?
Yes.
Like, the question that this guy, Ross Douthat, asks her here is like, you have to listen to this and ask yourself, why would you not answer this question? It's like, it's not even giving any information away, by the way.
Well, no, I suppose it gives away income and all that, but it's actually important from a scientific point of view because you get data from doing the data you get from doing 3,000 is a lot less than you get from doing 3 million embryos. Let's get really comically vague because she's just comically vague after.
No, she's asked a really simple question here. Let's listen to this. She's asked a really simple question and look at her do somersaults instead of answering it.
Yes,
I think the first baby screened by Orchid was born in 2023. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So how many people have used your service, and how many babies, just as a guesstimate, have been born at this point?
Yeah, I don't know. It's honestly pretty hard to say because we're kind of like a blood testing company. You know what I mean? People will come to us and, get their embryos tested, but they might not necessarily come back to us and say, hey, we're pregnant. And, sometimes
how many people have had their embryos tested with you? Ballpark?
We don't really talk about that publicly, but, it's in the thousands.
It's in the thousands, but not the tens of thousands?
We don't talk about it publicly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, why not talk publicly, right? Why not talk publicly about this stuff? Like, why are you why aren't you saying how many customers you have? Now, you made a good point. I think you were saying earlier, of course, by saying how many customers she has, you also indicate how much money she's making.
Yes.
But she's so vague about it. It makes me she's really vague here in a way that just doesn't rest well with me at all. If she's putting herself forward as kind of all very scientific-y and all very for the good of humanity, by the way, this is all about the good of humanity. So why so vague, Then she goes on, by the way, and she does a thing that Elizabeth Holmes did as well. She does this thing about, she has a great tragic story.
Origin story.
Origin story, because you need a great origin story when you're selling stuff. So she has a great origin story that I think, and it's of course the reason, and this is supposed to be the reason why she set up Orchid in the first place.
Do you remember Elizabeth Holmes' origin story here? Her uncle tragically died of cancer. Sorry, I'm not smiling about the uncle. And, she was so close to him. And of course, it emerged later, she saw him once a year at Thanksgiving, maybe, and he died.
But he worked really well for marketing.
Yeah, no, she told the story while he's been interviewed by Bill Clinton.
And by the way, she needed something to humanize herself because she definitely had this automaton look to herself. Look at her there again. There's Tyrannus. But let's not keep going back to Elizabeth Holmes. Let's have a listen to Noor here. Explain why she set up Orchid in the first place.
Second personal question. So you've mentioned in a number of interviews that you were inspired to get into this field and focus on it because of your mother's experience. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So growing up, my mom got a pretty devastating diagnosis. She started by losing her night vision. Then she lost her peripheral vision, and then slowly she started losing her central vision. So she ended up getting diagnosed with a condition called retinitis pigmentosa. So what that means is that you sort of progressively go blind. And it was a pretty long odyssey to actually get that diagnosis. And then there was a lot of fear around, okay, is that going to affect, her siblings, my aunts and uncles? Is it going to affect us or children? And, really kind of what I was obviously very young when a lot of this was happening.
How old was she when this sort of manifested itself?
So I think the first symptoms that I think she had admitted to, at least, my dad, were probably in her early 30s. And then I think maybe in her mid 30s is when kind of he pushed her enough to be like, hey, I think this is something that, you should really be, looking into. And I think that, really what, sat with me and left, and what I felt through that experience was just this sort of profound unfairness, right? This idea that, there's this genetic lottery that's unfolding and some people win and some people lose, and through no fault of their own, someone who I love, bitterly, isn't going to be able to enjoy the things like, being able to, see her grandkids and, just things that I think, you and I take for granted that, hey, we're going to be able to see into old age.
So then they ask, then the questions go on to ask, do they screen for the actual disease that her mother had? So let's hear how she contorts to answer this one.
Is this one of the conditions is your mother's condition one of the conditions that you test for right now with Orchid?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have an entire category.
Monogenic or polygenic?
It's a little complex, like the entire disorder, but the set of conditions that we test for are the monogenic forms of retinitis pigmentosa. So we also screen for monogenic forms of blindness, deafness, a lot of congenital anomalies that are known. But the important thing I think to understand is like for cancer, for example, as a category, we test for monogenic forms of cancer, but not all of cancer is monogenic, if that makes sense. To me, it seemed like the most important thing for me as a future parent was that I wanted to be able to minimize the chance that my child was going to be affected by what affected my mom and what affects, unfortunately, millions of people today, right? So right now, it's like this really horrible situation where these people who have these genetic diseases, each of them are individually so rare that pharma companies have no incentive to design a cure. The market is literally too small. that's why I was so activated by this idea.
Embryo screening is faster, more certain, more comprehensive than waiting for a cure.
I honestly don't really know if they do screen for the disease. Everything's very vague. Everything is, and of course, comically vague is one thing, but I think the next
section, I think for me, the next section was what was really important, because after a kind of lengthy enough interview, I felt that Duttart, and Duttart really, the reason that I'm saying this is his credentials at the New York Times are very much the fact that he's like the lone conservative voice, basically, that he's this very, very distinct conservative voice, very devout Roman Catholic and all of that, which, if that's your shtick, if that's what he is, then I'd love to hear it from him. And funny enough, I feel like we don't really hear that from him. But he does start, at the end, he starts to try to pin her down on the value of these embryos, the actual human value. And again, you'll hear how she gets very slippery here. Let's have a listen.
Especially the ones that are not implanted.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Let's have a listen.
So I just have to ask, do you think the embryos that are created in the orchid process have any kind of moral status whatsoever?
I think that embryos are extremely precious. I mean, they're the most miraculous and like magical cells that we've, I think, ever discovered, right? I mean, they somehow differentiate, into the trillions of cells that make, you and I. Mm-hmm. But I think that something that is, unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't understand biology. So what happens the old-fashioned way, right? A lot of embryos are discarded through that process. Nature is extremely brutal, right? So a lot of people don't know that, even people in their 20s, they have about a 20% chance of getting pregnant every month, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, an egg can fertilize, right? Great, now you have an embryo, but that doesn't mean that embryo is going to implant. So at the natural process at home, there's been multiple, really large scale studies on this. Lots of embryos are discarded at home. It's just that IVF makes that process visible that is currently invisible to people that's happening at home.
That's not true. So the term discard implies agency. If you and your spouse,
think it implies agency.
Okay, fine. The obvious difference between embryos that fail to implant when a husband and a wife have sex and embryos that are discarded in a laboratory is that in the first case, the embryo dies with no human being deciding that it's going to die. And in the second case, the embryo dies because the laboratory decided it should die. In the same way, all human beings die over a long enough time horizon. Everyone's survival rate is 0. But if you had a system that was set up that required discarding hundreds of thousands of adult human beings, we wouldn't say, oh, everybody dies. Mother Nature is much more cruel, right? Like, in order for your argument to work, you just have to say, the embryo doesn't have any moral status that we're obliged to respect, and therefore it's okay to discard it. All this talk about, Mother Nature, I think is a distraction from that issue.
I think that your framing is dishonest, and I want to tell you why it's dishonest.
So she ends there with, I think your framing is dishonest, which is, I think that I could translate that for you, for anyone who doesn't know what that your framing is dishonest means, is I really hate where these questions are going. I'm really uncomfortable. Yes. And so what I'm going to do is, instead of answering like a grown-up, I'm going to accuse you of being dishonest, But I feel like he tries really, really badly, by the way, to pin her down on the actual implications of her technology could have on the world, because the thing that he doesn't say ever, which I just don't get, I don't get why he doesn't do it, is if her technology had existed when her mother was starting to have a family. Her mother was starting to have a family. Her mother was organizing. Her mother was starting to have a family. I'm even doing it in just in that most recent past. If that was happening, then her mother would have said, "Well, I don't want this to be passed on." And basically, this girl herself, who's formed this company, she wouldn't exist. And that,
her mother wouldn't exist. So as you say, he tries to pin her down, but she wouldn't exist. Noor Siddiqui would not exist if this technology had been in place when her mother was an embryo, when her mother was being born, because they would have screened her mother. They would have found, maybe, I'm not convinced that the science is even there at this stage. They would have found her genetic predisposition, her mother, and they would have discarded her mother. Now, her mother has this genetic illness, but has her mother had a full life?
Has her mother any value in her mother?
Is there any value in her mother at all? Does she think does she ever at 3 a.m. at night lie there think, my God, my technology would have got rid of my mother if it works. So, and then by implication, then it would have got rid of me because I wouldn't have been born from my mother. But actually, she can see her mother now, and her mother, yes, has this blindness, but I would think if you put a microphone, got the mother on a podcast.
Oh yeah, I think we should hear from the mother. That's right.
You know, I mean, you've got this genetic disease. You don't deserve to live.
They should just take her outside and shoot her, actually, because we don't want those blind people around. You know, there's no value in them at all.
No.
In this scenario, certainly that's the way it works. You know, and I don't see why you can't extend it. You know, but she's very, very vague when it comes to the details. She's very.
She goes
very
in this next exchange. She goes from dispose, and then when she's asked awkward questions, deflect. So let's hear that exchange.
Okay, but you are promoting a technology that has profoundly, potentially transformative effects on society. Clearly, you're arguing for it because it has beneficial effects. And you are essentially saying, you don't know what's going to happen to all the extra embryos. Who can possibly say it's just up to people? We know in practice what is likely to happen, right? And I feel like that's true. I feel like I'd like to know what you think about the moral status of the embryo. Isn't that something I should be able to know? Like just to go back to the example you talked about, right? With your mother and her illness, right? Mm-hmm. In the world you're describing, your mother would exist as an embryo, right? Not your mother as an adult human being, your mother as an embryo. And someone running an orchid-style program would look at that embryo and say, we're not going to implant that embryo. Does that bother you at all? Would you say, oh, I'd like to have my mother have a chance at life through some kind of low probability, compassionate injection? Are you comfortable with that embryo being frozen or discarded? What's your actual view?
Look, that question has, again, extremely dishonest framing and dichotomous reasoning. So let me just walk you through my grandma's life situation. So do you support women or girls getting the chance to finish high school? Do you support girls getting the chance to choose who they marry and when they marry, right? Well, my grandma
somebody's doing some dishonest framing here, but I don't think it's me.
And then this is kind of sums up the whole our problems with the whole podcast is this exchange which combines the comically vague science with the Nazi unfit for living vibe. So it brings in both of them. Basically, it's very similar to the Elizabeth Holmes things, because Elizabeth Holmes would say, I can take a prick of blood and amplify the blood and do all these tests. She's taking 4 cells from an embryo and amplifying. He's going, there are serious difficulties with this, that there's any science to the amplification process. But so she both is vague on the science of it and on the moral quandary of it. So let's hear that.
Let's talk about the science for a minute, right? So there's a lot of scientific controversy about the work you're doing. There's a lot of criticism and a lot of skepticism, not about the basic idea of genetic screening, but about both the specific way you're doing it, and some of the promised results. So I want to ask you some of the questions that seem to come up in that area. Sure. And the first has to do with just the process that we've talked about already of amplification, where you are essentially copying a full genome from a smaller sample, right? And something that you hear frequently is that this process itself introduces errors, that the genome that is amplified is not going to be identical to the actual genome of the embryo. And so you are inevitably, in doing that kind of process, going to introduce essentially potential error levels and its own form of sort of dice rolling and Russian roulette into the test results that you get back. What's your response to that critique? So it is true that older amplification methods suffered from those issues. So kind of the technical terms for these are, allele dropout and, lack of uniformity of coverage. But basically, what does that actually mean? It means that you're not getting a representative sample of the genome that you want, right? But that is sort of the core technical problem, one of the core technical problems that ORCID solved. And the reason how the way that we know that we've solved it is that we take the exact same standards that are used on blood and saliva, and we've exceeded
those standards, right? And we've actually gone, a step further than that, where we've actually sequenced babies that have been born. So we've actually can compare the embryo sample to the cord blood and the DNA of the baby at birth, and we've shown that, all of those results agree, and that we can reliably we can reliably read the entire genome from that really small sample.
To what extent are these results publicly available, as opposed to reflecting sort of proprietary corporate technological findings? Can I as a journalist see those results and take them to a geneticist who's skeptical of you and sort of have them read it? Is that out there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that would be your right. So, all of these validations are public. They've been peer reviewed. We've also had, state and, federal level inspections come into the lab to also review all of these documents. That last piece around the outcome data is still in sort of a preprint phase. So that means that it's just going to be available publicly in a few months before the end of the year.
What is proprietary?
Yeah, so the amplification protocol, as well as the computational methods that we use in order to, basically call variants and build these genetic risk score models. So it's the risk score that is essentially a trade secret. You can't tell me how you generate the risk score because a potential competitor would come along and steal that method. Well, what I'm saying is that both the chemistry and the computational side is proprietary. They're all sort of new methods that we've invented. So for the chemistry side, we have a provisional patent that we filed, and for the computational side, that's kind of more in the trade secret category.
Yes.
So then do that. But you have a problem with your H's. So then do that.
Okay.
Irish people have problems with the H's. Do that. Asks the very reasonable question about how if a test on a few cells from an embryo really captures what is, it's kind of following on from what you said previously, what is medically diagnosable and human. No real answer here again, but let's dispose. No
matter what.
I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah, the science is very vague. And we're talking here also about, it asks about peer review. I'm going to go back in and look for these peer reviewed studies. She does say it's all peer reviewed, and I'm going, I don't think
so. Well, let's listen to that last exchange there.
Let's talk about then questions about polygenic testing, right, and diseases that are caused or influenced by multiple genes. My understanding is that the state of our actual knowledge of how the genome works and influences things like diseases is limited in all kinds of ways, and that there are sort of two sets of open questions about this kind of polygenic screening. First, just to what extent is it basically reliable? And second, to what extent do we just not know what other things a set of genes might be doing, right? So you can imagine a world where you look at an embryo and you say, it has this set of genes that make it somewhat more likely to have heart disease or Parkinson's. We don't want to use that embryo. But then it turns out that something in that set of genes also codes for resistance to disease or something like that, right? I think this concept is called pleiotropy, the idea that a set of genes can have different effects, right, in the same person. So how does your testing deal with both of those realities? Like, one, just sort of basic uncertainty about how genes interact with each other, and two, the idea that you might be, testing for one condition and failing to capture some other set of effects that would be themselves lifelong and powerful.
Yeah. Let's definitely get into both of those concerns. So I think what people are really asking when they talk about pleiotropy is this idea of genetic trade-offs, right? So, if you lower risk for schizophrenia, are you actually unknowingly increasing risk for another condition?
Yes.
And one thing that I love about genetics is that it's become a incredibly quantitative science. So researchers, not just at ORCID, but around the world have actually looked into this exact question. So what they do is they build something called a confusion matrix. So what that does is it's testing pairwise correlations between schizophrenia or any disease of interest and thousands of other diseases, right? And the dominant pattern in that data is that diseases actually that are of a similar category correlate with each other. So basically, schizophrenia risk actually correlates with risk for bipolar disorder and other mental health conditions. So what that means is that this idea of genetic trade-offs isn't the dominant story the data tells. The dominant story the data tells is actually that when you want to reduce risk for mental health disorders, you actually reduce risk for multiple diseases simultaneously, right? So heart disease is has the most correlation with things like atrial fibrillation and other cardiac conditions. So it's not the case that there's these massive genetic trade-offs that we know of, and then it is the case that it happens in a small number of specific situations. Those correlations have been found, but the dominant story is actually that you're able to reduce risk for many conditions in the same category at once. And I think that that's something that is a really exciting discovery, because I think that that would, I totally agree. It's like it's a fear that people have, is that am I unknowingly increasing risk for another condition?
So, at the end of all of this, I very much doubt the science at all. I think this sounds, as you said, Phil, very much like Tyrannus. But I think what's very clear, though, is that lots and lots of embryos are getting killed off. That's for sure. And by the way, what if it did work? Like, what if it actually did work? Like, because that's a scenario that you should think about. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. But what does ORCID screen for? And it's kind of interesting, the things that they're trying to basically edit out of humanity. So like one of them, for example, is autism. So that'd be no Elon Musk then. And I don't like the idea of a world without Elon Musk, I'm going to be honest with you. But also, Dan Aykroyd has autism. I kind of like Dan Aykroyd. I thought Dan Aykroyd was very funny. Anthony Hopkins, and Albert Einstein had autism. Yeah. I looked these up earlier, and I was like, this is what they're saying. Epilepsy is another thing that they want to get rid of. So they see that, if the science was true, and I genuinely don't believe it is, but as I said, I still think they're destroying lots and lots of humans. Epilepsy, that'll get rid of Danny Glover, Neil Young, Prince, Elton John. And there's loads of other stuff. Particularly, by the way, I was the minute when I saw like that they're going, and on one level you can imagine how this could sell, So you're going to edit out, or you're going to just not edit out, by the way, you're going to kill off any babies that might show a potential for bipolar disorder or for schizophrenia. And I happen to have a friend who is a psychiatrist and who has done a lot of work actually on schizophrenia. And one of the things that she discovered, which is not news to most of you, is a lot of extremely brilliant people, especially artists, very, very often are bipolar or have schizophrenia. Like and that includes people like Vincent van Gogh, Robin Williams, Virginia Woolf. By the way, Brian Wilson, the co-founder of the Beach Boys, was diagnosed with schizophrenic affective disorder. I'm just going to give you a few of these names. Sylvia Plath, who actually wrote, by the way, really eloquently about mental illness. Robert Lowell, Joanne Greenberg, the woman who wrote I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, who actually wrote about her experience with schizophrenia. Lord Byron,
By the way,
Robert Burns, Jack Kerouac, by the way, On the Road. The Beat Generation.
Obviously, it's terrible for families, but sometimes it can come and it can disappear very quickly. It's not necessarily a lifetime.
Yes,
but also,
and it can be treated.
If what we're saying is that if someone has an episode of schizophrenia or a tendency to have schizophrenia, dispose.
Yes, kill. But these stories of people, trying to manipulate and get the perfect child, and this basic eugenics, which is the only word for this, it's everywhere now. And I just spotted, when we were working on this story, I spotted like the Free Press have done a huge story recently. Huge story. I couldn't even get into it, but the headline, The Bride of Chinese Frankenstein and the Race to Make Designer Babies. The Wall Street Journal also did a huge piece, and I'm just going to give you a little tiny piece from that. And the headline was Inside Silicon Valley's Obsession with High IQ Babies. So parents are paying up to $50,000 for new genetic testing services that include promises to screen embryos for IQ. For IQ.
What is it?
Wait, and so the startups, one of them is called Nucleus Genomics and one of them is called Here as Sight, have begun publicly offering IQ predictions based on genetic tests to help people select which embryos to use for in vitro fertilization. And the Bay Area demand is high for the service, which costs from around $6,000 at Nucleus and $50,000 at Here as Sight. But now, yes, Phil, exactly. First of all, the one thing that I know about IQ testing is that, and I remember this years ago, you can go and study how to do those IQ tests and then you get a really nice score out of it. And so somebody who hasn't studied how to do those IQ tests could do really bad at it and be highly intelligent. But do we want the whole world to be full of highly intelligent people, or do we want the world to be full of randomers who can do all kinds of everything?
But also, I mean, very sadly, two of the most intelligent people that I know from my childhood, like I would say the highest IQ people, have had failure to thrive lives.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go into details.
Yeah.
But
it's not a guarantee of happiness, by the way, and it's not and certainly not a guarantee of a fulfilled life.
If you go to a certain level of IQ, it's you'd almost not wish it on your worst enemy.
But I think the thing that's really kind of very, very creepy is to understand the prevalence of this. This is everywhere now, and so there's a silent Holocaust going on because people are producing all these embryos, and they're, she had all these, euphemistic terms for whatever, I'm trying to think, editing out or whatever, very, very scientific kind of words, as opposed to just kill them off, and these are human beings. These are human beings with everything within them that if allowed to continue would grow into a human being, and that's what they're killing. But it's kind of part of, and with the next story that we're going to look at, which is so connected to that, is the same thing. It's just this kind of both sides of the beginning of life and the end of life is, the value of humanity is being constantly eroded. So the Atlantic magazine, I'm just going to do a small piece on this because the story is actually the whole story is worth reading, and it's about the headline was Canada is killing itself, and it's about the medical assistance in dying, which MAID, which is huge in Canada. In fact,
how big is it?
Well, I mean, not love, but I mean, this is how big it is. It's the world's fastest growing euthanasia regime in the world is Canada. So in Canada, 4.7%, almost 5% of all deaths are euthanasia deaths.
That's amazing because, we're told Canada has one of the best healthcare systems on the planet, apparently. And, if you live in a desert somewhere and the old people are, it used to be, wasn't there a whole thing, but dying people were kind of left behind in the desert because they would be a burden to the tribe or something.
Oh, yes.
We're talking about the most developed, progressive country in the world with the leading healthcare. I mean, you could have people in nursing homes and even at home with really top of the range medical care in these wealthy, progressive countries. But no, the trend is let's kill them off.
Let's kill them off. So in 2023, Canada reported 15,000, of these medical assisted in dying. So it's the fifth, as I said, the fifth leading cause of death in Canada. And they're very fast approaching the Netherlands. But interestingly, the Netherlands have just been at it longer. So the Netherlands started doing it in 2001, and 5% of the population of people who die in the Netherlands have been killed off through euthanasia. Canada legalized euthanasia in 2016. But so the Atlantic does this really, really long piece. There's loads of disturbing stuff in it, really disturbing stuff in it. But one of the things, I think the thing that really got to me was the banality of the evil of it. But one of the lines...
Sorry, the banality of evil,
the banality of evil within this whole practice. By the way, at the very beginning of the article, he describes this symposium, like they go to this medical conference, and it's not really a medical conference, it's a killing conference, and it's 300 people at it, and they're all there, you have a drink with me later on, and it's a big networking thing going on, and they're all hanging out with each other, It's a huge business.
It's a massive business.
There was one line, this particular line I liked in The Atlantic. This is the story of an ideology in motion, of what happens when a nation enshrines a right before reckoning with the totality of its logic. If autonomy in death is sacrosanct, is there anyone who shouldn't be helped to die? Right? But anyway, as I said, the banality of the evil in this was what really got to me, and I just wanted to bring this part to a conscious level, basically. Patients meticulously orchestrate their final moments, planning celebrations around them. So they have weekend parties before a Sunday night euthanasia in the garden. Yeah. And by the way, and this is part of the article which I found extraordinary, a Catholic priest to deliver the last rites.
Well, they should refuse.
I mean, I really wish they'd name the priest, because I don't think he's not a priest anymore. He's not a Catholic if he's doing that.
They need to stand outside protesting.
Absolutely. Extended family renditions of Old Lang Syne. Can you believe that? At the bedside. And for $10.99, you can design your MAID experience with the help of the Be Ceremonial app. Suggested rituals include a story altar, a forgiveness ceremony, and the collecting of tears from witnesses.
You horrible, horrible
horrible, horrible people.
Normalizing
the maid
disgusting,
process.
horrible people. That is just, you are disgusting. You are Canadians.
Canadians, I know. We've had issues
them.
with
I beep and hate them.
Yes.
You know, with their
their sanctimony. I know.
Do we have a bleeping machine? Because I feel like...
Don't be bleeping now, Philip. No bleeping. I'm going to continue just because I'm coming to the end of this. Normalising the maid process, by the way, the medical assistance in dying, the euthanasia process for children facing the death of an adult in their life, a pyjama party at a funeral home, painting a coffin in a schoolyard.
You sick bleeps.
Right.
You sick.
So one of the people that they spoke to, and I just want to, one of the people they spoke to was this woman, Stephanie Green, who acknowledged to herself how upbeat she felt following a recent provision. A little hyped up on the adrenaline, she said. She put it in a memoir about her first year providing medical assistance in death.
Of course, she loves it. These are serial killers.
Green realised it was gratification she was feeling. A patient had come to her in immense pain and she had been given a position to offer her relief. In the end, she believed she had given a gift to a dying man.
And what happens when there's no one coming to you?
Well, sorry. And the other thing, by the way, is, they have a few of these kind of the hard line cases.
Yeah.
But in Canada, they have a thing called Track 2. So which is fast growing, and Track 2 are patients who are not dying and who are accepted for this. The whole thing is it's really sick. And by the way, all over America, by the way, we're going to put a map up there of the places in America where euthanasia is already legal.
Oh, look at this quote. As early as 2016, the federal government had agreed to launch exploratory investigations into the possible future provisions of assisted dying for people whose sole underlying medical condition is a mental disorder, as well as to mature minors.
Oh, yeah.
People younger than 18 who are, quote, deemed to have requisite decision-making capacity.
Oh, yeah.
They can't get a tattoo, by the way.
Yeah.
The government also pledged to consider advance requests, that is, allowing people to consent now to receiving aid at some specified future point when their illness renders them incapable of making or affirming their decision to die. But I can just say, Granny told me that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Could you do it before the inheritance tax kicks in, please?
Yep.
Because, or actually, I'm just tired of this. I've got a holiday booked.
Well, funny, I felt overall the tone of the Atlantic piece, I thought was uncharacteristically negative. I thought the overall tone was not very celebratory of what's happening in Canada, because they can see, and it's really funny actually, and not funny, but awful. Everywhere they try to introduce euthanasia, the argument put forward by people who are against it say, they use the slippery slope. They talk about the slippery slope. And it's weird. It's kind of weird because the slippery slope gets always shot down. And they're like, don't be talking about the slippery. Don't be slippery. We won't have a slippery slope here. And yet everywhere where it exists, there's a slippery slope. Yes. They're talking about infants as well. They're talking about doing it with children who have disabilities.
Meanwhile, the Quebec College of Physicians has raised the possibility of legalizing euthanasia for infants born, quote, with, quote, severe malformations, close quote, a rare practice currently legal only in the Netherlands, the first country to adopt it since
the Nazis
in 1939. Can I just say,
and by the way, severe malformations, and this is something that comes up in the Atlantic article, that an enormous amount of the language around euthanasia legislation is really vague, and they leave it up to the physician to decide what's what.
You know what this reminds me of?
I know what this reminds you of.
Comfort care.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, sorry.
No, I mean let's be real.
I thought you were going to say trans.
Well, funny, it does, but comfort care. This, they're talking about legalizing it. It goes on a lot. It's the untold story. And that was, remember the governor of California, who talked about letting infants die. It was a conversation between the parents and the doctor.
Was it California or no?
No, it was Virginia.
Virginia.
Yeah, and
North.
the Planned Parenthood were the first person to ask him to resign because he said the quiet bit out loud. Let's play the clip from our movie Gosnell, and this is taken from
the transcripts of the Gosnell trial.
Yeah, so the prosecution, in order to prove that Gosnell was a terrible, terrible person, brought in a good legal abortionist to show, oh, this is how good people do it. Then she was asked about what happens if a baby is born alive, and we learned the phrase comfort care. So let's play that.
Have you ever had a live birth during an abortion attempt, doctor?
No, I have not, because we listened to the sonogram to ensure that the fetal heart has stopped.
Well, what if you made a mistake?
We don't.
Well, what if you did?
Objection. Hypothetically, Your Honor.
Your Honor, she's a medical expert. I'd like to have her opinion.
Overruled. I'm going to allow the question, but stay on point, counselor.
What would you do if the baby was out and it was breathing?
We would issue comfort care.
Comfort care. Can you define that for us?
That's keeping the fetus warm and comfortable. Eventually, it will pass.
Eventually, it would pass. So basically, you'd let it die.
Yeah, so that is taken exactly from the transcript. So, you know, the killing of the euthanasia of babies with severe malformations is there. It needs to be destroyed, not widened. So, but you're saying,
and we have heard, by the way, and just on that one, you know, I mean, we have heard, and it's anecdotal, but we have heard, and I remember hearing this because a friend of ours had a Down syndrome child, and obviously we started to get really interested in Down syndrome children and started to hear stories, and she reported a story from a friend who had a Down syndrome child in Paris, in France, and the doctor said, don't worry about it, we'll just leave it in a room here and it'll dehydrate to death, basically. And I've heard that more than once. So you know, it happens. This is what happens because they deem, and you know, and if you're living in a world, by the way, where all of this, and it's only going to get worse, if you're living in a world where they're going to start analysing embryos and saying things like, well, I don't want somebody who's going to, you know, who might be depressed or whatever, you know, because whatever. But by the way, if they go to that, what else will they screen for? Would they screen for, you know, like would they try to screen out gay people? I mean,
those
you know,
black communities that Kate from Waterford spent a lot of time with.
Yeah.
They might be interested in.
They might be very interested in screening out anybody who might be part of the LGBTQ, etc.
Well, they're already very good at screening out women in the embryos. So, you know, why wouldn't you move on to the next malformation? We're going to talk now about the New Yorker, Doreen Saint Felix, or Saint Felix.
Saint Felix. I love that.
Yes.
She's one of those fancy names.
Yes,
fantastic.
Doreen Saint Felix.
And she's very lucky to have gotten to write for the New Yorker.
Yeah,
I mean, what an honour, you know.
So, as such, she did a devastating takedown of the Sydney Sweeney American Jeans ad,
which I just still
So we play that ad. Hopefully we can. Let's play the ad.
I'm not here to tell you to buy American Eagle jeans. And I definitely won't say that they're the most comfortable jeans I've ever worn. Or that they make your butt look amazing. Why would I need to do that?
But let me just give you an example. Denim ads get people riled up. Does it all flow from the foundational contrast between starch and flesh? No doubts the minds behind the Sweeney campaign wanted to stir memories of Brooke Shields declaring to Richard Avedon's camera in 1980, You want
to know what comes between me and my Calvins?
No.
Nothing.
You know, and in another ad for the campaign, Shields, mock struggling to put on a pair of skin-tight jeans, says, the secret of life lies hidden in the genetic code. The element of perversion, the artistic touch is in that Calvin Klein ad was Shields' age, which was 15.
Brooke Shields, yes, back in the day.
Sweeney is 27. No great artist directed these commercials. The illusion... So, sexualizing a 15-year-old is great art, by the way.
Okay.
Yes, according to this woman.
Oh, according to her, okay.
Yes,
all right.
yes. Sweeney is 27. No great artist directed these commercials, right?
So hang on. This Doreen St. Felix, she is saying that the Brooke Shields ad was artistic.
Yes.
And she didn't have a problem with the child being 15.
No.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yes.
So anyway.
No great artist directed these commercials. That's a criticism. The illusion is incoherent, whereas Shields' illusion was very coherent, apparently. Unless, of course, we root around for other meanings and we don't have to search for long. Jeans, referring to Sydney Sweeney's famously large breasts. Jeans, referring to her whiteness. Interestingly, breasts and the desire for them are stereotyped as objects of white desire as opposed to, say, the black man's hunger for ass. Yeah, this is what she's written. This is in the New Yorker.
The New Yorker.
Sweeney, on the precipice of totalizing fame, has an adoring legion. Notice the word legion there, you know, it's kind of white. The most extreme of whom want to recruit her as a kind of Aryan princess. To them, she signals, as my colleague Lauren Michelle Jackson wrote, quote, a rejoicing in the perceived return to a bygone beauty standard in the wake of all that overzealous feminism they blame on the CV. You know, it's just,
I'm not sure what any of that's.
No, that was my thing. I don't understand
what you just said.
What she's, that's there. I just
and you're very smart, Phil.
I think I'd like to think
above average, I would say, intelligence.
Yeah. In fact, if I was embryo screened, I might survive.
I think they might have chosen you, Phil.
Yes,
I'm not sure about how I'd have survived, but I think they would have chosen you. But this is very funny because so what happens anyway? So as many people know, there was this huge drama about this ad, and this woman then obviously, you know, the New Yorker thought it was so significant that they gave a platform to this woman to write this.
No, she's a staff writer. She's a staff writer.
But obviously they all decide at an editorial meeting, you know, what are we going to write about next week? Well, why don't you write about this thing? So she's written about this, and her biggest problem basically is the implication.
Everything's racist.
It's all racist.
It's all racist, and she's a victim. So then someone.
Can we just establish then that this lady is not white herself? She's black.
Very proudly.
So then what happens?
The journalist Chris Rufo goes through her tweets. April 7th, 2015. To be honest, this is from Doreen St. Felix, who is criticizing American
Eagles. Writes for the New Yorker. To be honest, whiteness fills me with a lot of hate. Can't really be a prude about it anymore. I'm often angry and hateful about it.
December 14th, 2014. I hate white men. You are the worst. Go nurse your bleeping Oedipal complexes and leave the earth to the browns and the women.
June the 4th, 2014. White people. You who literally started a plague because they couldn't wipe their ass need never say they taught black people hygiene. Okay, I don't understand what that is. January 13, 2015. Of course white people don't bathe. It's in their blood. Their lack of hygiene literally started the bubonic plague, lice, syphilis, etc.
I think she may need some help with her medical. I think she would need she could probably go and work for Orchid, actually, with that level of medical expertise.
And by the way, she obviously didn't see the version of The Field that we saw with J.B. Keane, where one of the characters, who looked quite well, the wife complained that he hadn't washed in a year. March the 10th, 2015.
No, she's saying white people don't bathe. So maybe she did see The Field.
Oh yeah, that's true. No, but my point is that the guy was doing quite well. He looked very healthy, despite the fact that he didn't ever wash. And the wife looked well.
I'm not sure the bubonic plague either. I think that was carried on fleas and rats. But
yes, March the 10th, 2015. I would be heartbroken if I had kids with a white guy and they didn't look phenotypically black. I want them to look like me, my parents. So isn't she lovely?
Well, actually, funny, I've seen people talk on Twitter and they said she will 100% marry a white guy.
Why did they say that?
People who know more about race and black women, you know, these ambitious, smart black women, they want to marry up, you know, and there's not that big of a pool in the black community. So they'll marry a billionaire.
She'll marry the
George Soros's son, other son, you know.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, and question is, should she be fired? Should she be fired for being a racist?
No, but she should never have been hired.
Yes.
Actually, but to be fair, she's in favour of cancel culture. So she should be fired under her rules.
Under her rules.
She should also be fired, though, for writing incomprehensible gibberish.
That's fair. That's more offensive than anything else.
In the New Yorker, yes. Home of Dorothy Parker and James Baldwin and all these great, Jack Kerouac. And it's like, I read you that paragraph and I knocked me down with a feather. I don't know what she's saying, you know? So she should be, as they said about Cinna the Poet and Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, kill him for his bad verse. They were going to kill Cinna because he was a conspirator. And they go, I'm not a conspirator, I'm the poet. And they go, kill him for his bad verse.
Okay, tell us about, this next story I just think is extraordinary.
Yes.
Just unbelievable.
Well, one of my, as you know, I spend a lot of time on the internet, but one of my guilty pleasures in America is a thing called Financial Audit, which is a podcast presented by Caleb Hammer that's kind of part financial advice, part reality horror show. It really feeds my hunger for drama, raw emotion, and like all reality shows, actually, the one thing that reality shows really do is you look at it and you go, no matter how bad I am, my life isn't that
That's
bad.
right. Oh yeah, no, that's exactly why they're so popular.
Yes.
It's allowing people to feel like...
It's like 90 Day Fiancé, you think.
Yeah.
Like,
my life isn't too bad at all, actually.
I'm actually quite together. So watching guests squirm under Hammer. So Hammer does a financial audit of these 20 and 30-year-olds. It's like driving past a car crash.
Okay, give us a for instance.
People with 50,000, a 20-year-old there who's got 50,000 in debt. And the reason they don't need to repay it is I'm special, or I'll strike it rich next month, or their parents have coddled them forever and now they're going to pay off their debts, or they think the creditors are their parents. So because it's a modern podcast, there's a lot of effing and blinding and insults and screaming matches, and they seem to all live on junk food as well. But something else, a funny thing we spotted on the way to the financial audit, and Hammer spotted this, an chilling number of the people. In fact, every veteran, and I use the word veteran there as in people who've ever been in the army, not someone who spent 25 years in Kandahar. There's everyone who's ever served in the army
that he has on his show.
Every single one of them is on disability. So even if you even if you haven't been in combat, you haven't been in any kind of military action, one person was driving a truck, and you get a disability check. Like, for example, and I've changed the names here just because, I'm just to obscure the identity slightly. You can go back and check at the shows. Actually, let's play a clip of him realizing that, because we've got to have that clip there.
You're actually closer to being a legitimate failure in life than being successful. I need to tell you that because no one has.
I've done a pretty good job. I'm 30. I have a roof over my head. There's food on the table.
For
and my
now,
kids and
I don't think that's going to happen for very long. All of that you just said is a for now activity. And I'm sure you're going to claim disability after military, aren't you?
I'm getting it already.
I pay a lot of taxes for that. I feel like this show may have exposed something in the system.
Okay. I got hit by a car in uniform.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I just got out of the military a year ago.
Do you have disability?
Yes.
Okay. What's coming in from that?
From the VA, it's about $4,000.
Yeah. Of course you do, because there has not been one veteran in the history of this entire show that has not been on disability for the rest of their life. I'm totally good with military disability. We have an interesting fact that we've discovered in the show where we get veterans every other episode almost. There has not been one veteran, many of whom never actually went overseas, who are on disability for the rest of their life. This takes up 2% of the federal budget. 2% of the federal budget, just that alone, which is chunky. It's like $500 billion a year or something. So I'm not against it. It just seems like, there might be something wrong.
But anyway, so now let's take Alexis, 20, and Colt, 23. They're dubbed the most hated couple in financial audit history, which saying a lot.
That's a lot.
Yes. Colt is fresh out of the army at 22. He left the army at 22. So
is he on disability at 22?
Yeah. And what did he do? Well,
do we find out what the disability is?
Well, do you know what he did in the army? Come on, you that's very judgmental. Do you know what he did in the army?
Hand-to-hand combat in Afghanistan.
He drove trucks in America.
Oh, in America. Okay, right.
He's now a computer engineer pulling in $3,000 a month, plus about $4,000 a month in disability check for an injury he got whilst not on duty. So if you're in the army and you're at the disco off base and you twist and break your leg, and you've got and you say, I've got a limp now forever, you get army disability for the rest.
Disability, even though he's able to keep down a full-time job.
So you can get out on 100% disability and go the next day, get signed off 100% disability, get the $4,000 a month, and take up a job.
Oh dear,
hauling furniture.
Go on.
Well, go on. That it just gets worse and worse. Then there's Macy. She's 26, ex-Marine Corps. She's now working in Domino's for $9.70 an hour. Works 30 hours a week and turns down promotions because she doesn't want promotions.
And she has a disability. And do we find out what that is?
No, she doesn't. Yes, we find out how much she gets. $3,800 disability. But she's able to work in Domino's.
No. I mean, I think that I would have thought that would eliminate your ability to be claiming disability if you're fit to hold down a job.
And then there's Paul, 38, Ellie, 31. He is going to retire after 20 years on disability and on his pension. She is also on a pension. I love this one. Lauren, 34. She calls herself a cougar who loves being bankrolled by younger men. This is what she says, right?
Is she a veteran?
She's a veteran, but actually, as I say here, she's a veteran. She loves being bankrolled by younger men, but actually her biggest benefactor is a rather older man. Actually, he's 250 years old, and he's called Uncle Sam.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
She gets 3,400 a month. You know, and by the way, you can twist an ankle, you can do anything.
You told me a statistic earlier that what percentage, so all of these veterans who are on disability, and it now turns out that there's, I mean, I think this is a great benefit that this podcast has revealed, because he kind of did a deep dive into it, is to discover that this constitutes what percentage of the complete US budget?
Federal budget, 2% of the
2%. It's massive.
Keep these people in McDonald's. So you do 3 years in the army, get out on 100% disability, and of course there's specialist coaching people.
Oh, teaching you how to claim the disability.
Yes, so you can,
I think they've been working in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
Some of you will remember the recent podcast we did where we discovered that people in Northern Ireland, half of all cars in Northern Ireland are given to people on disability. And some of those disabilities include constipation. A very good friend of ours had really enjoyed that comment.
Tennis elbow and
failure to thrive.
No, and when the car is free, the insurance is free, the tax is free, and you get a nice car. So after Second World War, 15% of veterans got disability.
Okay, which kind of,
you know, is
it seems kind of reasonable.
So
now.
what percentage of veterans get disability now this year?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, I don't know the answer.
30%.
Oh, and there hasn't been a war for quite a while.
You know, the last war was, you know, the winding down of Iraq.
Yeah, but it still wasn't as big as World War II.
No.
You know.
No, we're talking. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the show here.
Yeah, I actually, can I tell one story about the
you can tell one story.
And there's no checking. Once you sign in, once you get your disability, unless you're really egregious. But one guy, an anonymous caller, obviously his ex-wife or something, he raked in over 1 million in disability payments because he was blind.
Okay, fair enough.
You know, however, being blind, he also managed to renew his driver's license several times, which actually is very significant for you because you're having trouble renewing your driver's license.
Oh, yes. If anyone out there wants to give me help with this, by the way, I went to the DMV recently, and to get my license renewed, they asked me to cover one eye and read the letters behind and cover the other eye. And I have one bad eye, so with the bad eye, I can't read the numbers. And then they said, okay, you're going to have to redo your driving test. And I'm going to confess to you, because I love you very much and you're our friends, I have now failed the test twice because I get so nervous when I get in the car. But I think it's really, really unfair because my ophthalmologist says I'm fit to drive. So if anyone out there has any ideas of how I can make an appeal to the DMV, or maybe to the Americans with Disability Act, by the way, and say to them this is discriminatory, because once I've got both my eyes open, which I plan to drive always with both my eyes open, there's no problem.
So this guy, he got $1 million, and he renewed, because he was blind, and he renewed his driver's license several times. Nobody twigged on. He also had a full-time job as
oh my God, I don't know, please.
A firearms instructor.
Oh my God, that's fabulous. Can we listen to him? Can we see that interview?
No, that was a court case.
That was a court case.
No, actually, this is not Caleb. One of Caleb's. I just did this.
When you found yourself.
Yes.
Delightful film.
So that is so.
We're coming to the end of the show.
Actually, go into the comments and give us. You must know some veterans who are very disabled and how much they're getting. And
we're very disabled, and you're saying that in inverted commas. How you feeling?
Yes. By the way,
because actually, you know what's really awful about that is that
destroys their lives.
No. Actually, there's another part to that. There are people who are actually disabled, and those people should get loads and loads of money. They should get more money than even the 4,000 a month or whatever. Who are genuinely disabled. It's the same thing in Ireland as well, by the way, and it's the same thing everywhere. Because of the people cheating the system, the people who really need that money are not getting as much as they should. When you see people like, you know, who have disabled children or whatever, they should not have to ever worry about money. But the reason they do is because so many people are basically stealing money. Anyway, we're coming to the comments section. Lots of comments from last week, by the way. One comment that struck me, by the way, was people were really, and lots of people told me they were really happy about the Libby app story and about being able to download books for free from the library. And one person said, yeah, and I'd forgotten to say it, that you can also get audiobooks on the library app. And there are different library apps, by the way, in different parts of the world. But in America, basically, the Libby app works. But and somebody else then wrote and said, hi, y'all. I was just listening to Alan and Lisa Robertson on their Unashamed podcast, and Al said he stayed with y'all. You. Sorry, I've just put on y'all there. And he said he stayed with you. How fun. And yes, it was fun.
We should point out, yes, that Al and Jace are doing their podcast, the Unashamed podcast, which is an amazing podcast. And yes, a week ago, they did speak about staying with us. So yes. And look, it's been, they also, and I see people thank you for your book recommendations.
Yes.
So that's good. So listen, I think that's the end of the podcast this weekend, Michael.
I think that's the end of the podcast. And as I said at the beginning or earlier on, I said I would end the podcast with showing you me making an Irish coffee. So let's finish out this podcast with a look at that recipe.
If you're right.
And we will see you next week, and we'll be coming from California next week.
And we'll be seeing Scaredy Cat and Top Cat.
And we will photograph Scaredy, who are still alive, by the way. We do believe. We get these infrequent photographs, proof of life photographs. So they apparently...
they'll speak to us now?
I think there'll be a lot of bad behaviour, but we will give you all of that scoop next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye. What you need to do is make a really nice big pot of coffee the way you like your coffee. And what you want to then do is you get a nice glass, get a nice glass, but put a spoon inside the glass, like a teaspoon inside the glass, because you're going to be putting in very hot liquid into that. So start though with your whiskey at the bottom of the glass. Now the whiskey should not be a high grade whiskey. So it should not be
Blackbush.
This boy here,
Heaven for
which
fans.
is very nice to sip on. And it shouldn't even be this boy, which is another grand one. And by the way, this is a more sophisticated version of this. But what we would recommend, I think so.
No, these are two completely different whiskies.
No,
right?
I know that they're two. I know they're two different whiskies, but they're both good.
Yeah, the equivalent of Jameson is Bush. This is Blackbush. This is
a high grade.
Further up, it's above. Anyway. So anyway, go ahead. So you should.
So basically, you want to get a regular Irish whiskey, like a Paddy or something like that.
Something cheap,
cheap and cheerful. And by the way, good enough to have a bottle of Paddy in the house anyway, a Paddy whiskey, because in the winter, if you've got the cold or whatever, you could just have you could have a lovely hot whiskey. Lovely thing to do, by the way, which I never talked about on this podcast before, and I quickly mentioned to those of you who are still experiencing cold. Cut a lemon. Put some cloves into the lemon. This is how they do it in Ireland. Throw that into a glass and pour in, again, a shot of whiskey and then boiling water over that, again, with a spoon in the glass. So here what you're going to do is...
That's the hot whiskey. Now we're on to the
Irish whiskey.
Coffee.
So, sorry, what did I just say?
Irish
the Irish
whiskey.
coffee.
Yeah.
So the Irish coffee, you put your shot of whiskey in there at the bottom again, and not too expensive one. Nice big... Oh, delightful. Delicious. Okay, that goes there. Put a spoon in the glass so the glass doesn't shatter. A nice, one of those sturdy glasses. Then pour in your favourite brew of coffee on top of that. And then what you want to do is you want to whip cream. You can use a machine or whatever like that, but you've got to watch it like a hawk. You do not want it stiff and sitting in peaks. You don't want that kind of cream. You want the cream to be pouring, but not pouring, if that's a very technical way of describing it. You want it to pour like super slowly, but be still in the pouring stage.
Yes.
And what you want to do then, and I learned this from my mother, God rest her soul, is that you put the back of the spoon, over the glass and just let that cream quietly come to the top of the glass. And then what will happen is you'll have a lovely head of cream at the top of the glass, and it'll look like a Guinness.
Yes.
And you know what? It's a lovely drink, actually.
How do you make the whipped cream?
That's very funny. That's a little private joke for Phelim and a friend of ours who we joke about, who cannot cook, and we always joke about how to whip cream.